How's it going, guys? So this is part two. We'll see if we can focus. This is part two of the live Q&A. We had connection issues the first time. We'll see if it goes any smoother this time. So once people start coming in, let me know how my video and audio is, and we'll kind of jump back into the conversation that we had going on. So see people starting to roll in. Please let me know how my audio and video is. So far, so good. Hopefully it stays that way, Steve Miller. So in the first video, we're talking a lot about my switch to Sony, why I did it, what it entailed, all the crap I had to sell, why I'm not adapting all of my lenses anymore. So yeah, looking good so far. Let me know as soon as it cuts out, because I have a feeling it's going to. So let me know as soon as that happens. That way I can kind of pause my rant. So as you guys have questions, let me know and we'll start answering questions, which we didn't really get too many of, or get too many of them in the first part. So like I mentioned, I've had zero issues with anything with the Sony A7R III. One of the questions that did come in on the last chat was if I've noticed color problems when photographing people, and I have noticed a difference in the color. Like everybody talks about Canon color science, and I didn't realize that was a thing while I was shooting Canon. But then when you switch, you notice it's a little bit more difficult to get the look that you used to have. I find that Sony is just a little bit stronger in the green channel. Basically, the green channel is just a little bit more amped up. So it means that, skin tones are a little bit, you have to add a little bit more magenta into most of your photos. I hear that has been changed in the A7 III as opposed to the A7R III. And realistically, I'm not doing a whole lot of portrait work anymore. I just still do some, but not nearly as much as I was, say, 2 years ago. So that's not going to affect me quite as much. But I have noticed that I have to take a little bit more control over my colors than I used to have to. How's it going, guys? Which Sony flash do I use, and am I happy with it? So far, I'm still using the same flash setup that I used with my Canon gear. I haven't gotten rid of any flash gear. My main flash is the Flashpoint Explorer 600. And what's cool about that is it's a wireless strobe, and it has 600 watts, so it's really nice and powerful. I was able to use the same controller with it, although I lost my ability to have high-speed sync because the controller doesn't communicate with the camera. I suspect I probably lost ETTL as well, but I didn't ever use ETTL. But I'm pretty sure that I can just swap out the controller and it'll still work fine. What's my Milky Way lens for that body? And have I tried night photography yet? So it's going to be this guy. This is the 16 to 35 f2.8 G Master. I have not tried doing any night photography with it yet. We're starting to enter into a time period where we don't have as much moon, so I can try that out soon. So more to the point, does it eat stars? I don't know yet. I'm excited to try, though. I know that it handles high ISOs really well. Thanks for answering the flash question. What do I think about Sony gear prices? They are very expensive. Yeah, so Sony lenses are not cheap. They're the most expensive lenses out there, especially these G Master lenses. G Master is kind of like Canon's version of an L lens, where it's like the premium top lens. And they are very expensive. Are they worth the money? I think that these lenses are sharper and higher quality than the Canon lenses were. They also have added technology where you have programmable buttons on the sides. Are they worth it? I think so. I mean, I'm definitely more thoughtful about what lenses I'm going to buy because they are so expensive. But the quality has been excellent. Build quality has been excellent. I have zero complaints about them. I do wish that they are cheaper, though. Am I going to be using a Metabones for my Canon lenses? So, Mike, your question about adapters, I kind of talked a little bit about in the first chat, but basically I bought both adapters. This is the Metabones, and over here, oh, my elbow hurts. Over here, I've got the Sigma MC11. So my initial plan was that I was going to adapt most of my Canon lenses. And the problem with that was that, for one, the MC11 that has great autofocus with my Sigma lenses is not weather sealed. And that's a problem for a landscape photographer. I need weather sealing. So for that reason, I got the Metabones as well. Sigma works really well with the Sigma lenses. But for my Canon 16 to 35, which I planned on keeping, I had to have the Metabones for the weather sealing. And when I did that, I lost autofocus in video. So the reason that I've decided to go with mostly native lenses is because I want that autofocus in video feature. And if you're gonna spend this much on a camera system, you might as well have the native glass that is giving you all of the focus benefits. And I was missing out on that by adapting. So came here after Thomas Heaton comment. Oh, awesome. Yeah, so Thomas is a great guy. I consider him an almost friend. Like, we hung out once when we taught together in Acadia. I've been a Thomas Heaton fan forever. Thomas's videos are awesome. And Thomas is cool in person too. Recently bought a Photo Pills app, decided to go shooting next Friday for Milky Way. Any tips would be useful. So one of the best things that you can do is, if you're going to be photographing the night sky, is focus. Getting sharp focus is one of the hardest things when you're photographing the night sky for the first time. So beforehand, like the night before or the day before or whatever, go out and take that same lens that you're going to be using and focus on something that's out at infinity. Focus on the horizon line and physically look at your lens to see where that lens is stopping when you're focused out at infinity. Remember that spot. That way, when you go out to do night photography, you can turn it right to that spot, go into manual focus, and you'll have it set. It's much easier to find that spot. I just lost my chat. It's much easier to find that spot and turn it right to that spot than it is to sit there and manually focus at night. And for some reason, I just lost my, oh, there it is. Okay. How is the accuracy of the autofocus compared to the 5D Mark IV? I love the autofocus in this thing. I feel like the autofocus is actually, in well-lit conditions, I should say, is more accurate than the 5D Mark IV. Or at least it's more responsive. Having all of those focus points is just like the coolest thing ever. The first time that you have it in autofocus continuous and you're like tracking a subject and you see all those tiny little green dots following it, it's amazing. I feel like it's just as good as a 5D Mark IV, only you have more focus points to choose from, and it seems to do a really good job of picking them on its own. And eye autofocus, I know anybody that hasn't actually used it but has heard people talk about it, it sounds like some kind of gimmick, but it is really, really cool if you're into portraits, because you can just get the composition you want, hit the eye autofocus, and boom, it finds the eye, no problem. And you don't have to sit there and focus and recompose or move focus points at all. Let's see. Did I have any issues with the gray focus box? Yes, the gray focus box annoys me a lot, actually. So when you're shooting a landscape, especially a landscape with kind of a darkish foreground, you move that gray focus box. That's the area where you're going to be focusing, and you can't see it. You just can't. It's really hard to see. You focus, and then it turns green, and you're like, oh, that's where it is. And then you have to kind of move it around from there. One of the ways I've gotten around being so annoyed by it is I've enabled the touch feature, so I can touch the back of the LCD, and then that's going to put that gray box there. That way I know where it is. So by doing that, I know where that focus box is going to be. Yes, it's super annoying. Do you think it's worth the cost and loss of f-stop using a UV filter? So I never, ever use UV filters. UV filters do nothing for your image quality other than ruin it. The only time I will use a UV filter is if I'm going to be shooting with a lens that has, like, a lot of lenses, when you focus or you zoom, like the Canon version, the vulnerable part where it actually focuses from, or where the part that actually moves, is in here by your front element. So if you're shooting a seascape and water gets in there, that's going to be a vulnerable spot, and that's how you can get water inside your lens. So if you're in a situation where you're going to get splashed by sea salt or something, putting a UV filter on can protect your lens. In a lens like this, though, where when you zoom it, it's actually moving back in here, you're not really gaining any added protection by putting a UV filter on. So most of the time, I'd never use a UV filter because all it does really is decrease image quality, and it makes lens flare worse. Let's see. Check the yeah, interesting. So Tony North, if we're talking about UV filters, or are we talking about circular polarizers? Circular polarizers are a different story. And Tony Northrup has an interesting take on that, but his take is kind of wrong. Like Tony Northrup's he's super knowledgeable guy, but he sometimes he doesn't look at it in the full context of things. So when I use circular polarizers, it's not when I have a big bunch of sky in my shot. When I use circular polarizers is when I have a whole bunch of wet foliage in my shot. So if I'm shooting a forest scene where there is no sky, but there's lots of wet leaves, a circular polarizer is amazing. And there's no way to duplicate what it actually does. So in that way, Tony Northrup is wrong. Forest scenes are excellent. Waterfall scenes are excellent for a circular polarizer. Big wide landscape with a lot of sky, not a great time for a circular polarizer. If you're shooting through a whole bunch of atmosphere, say you're in the Palouse region where I live, and you're at a place called Steptoe Butte where you're on top of this mountain basically, and you're shooting through a whole bunch of atmosphere, the circular polarizer cuts through the atmosphere and it decreases the amount of haze that you have in your shot, and it actually increases contrast. And you can mimic that with some contrast and decreasing the blue sliders and all that stuff, but it's much better to do it with a circular polarizer because you're not actually having to bend any pixels to get that. It's just better to use a circular polarizer. Did I buy A7 III or what? So this is A7R3. So this is the megapixel beast and flippy screen, which is kind of cool. Also, with this camera, I got the Really Right Stuff plate with it. And what's cool about this plate, you see this little bit here? It actually adds just a little bit of depth to the camera. That way, when you grab it, you have a place for your pinky. One of the complaints about Sony bodies is that the grip is a little bit too short and your pinky falls off. But the Really Right Stuff plate adds just enough to where you can actually have a place for your pinky. Also, another cool thing about Really Right Stuff L brackets is it's got the Allen wrench that you need to adjust it right here, held magnetically. You can go like boop, and it's right there. Pretty cool. L brackets are awesome. What's the main thing you miss with your Sony glass compared to the Canon lenses? Color or sharpness? So I feel like this lens is a beast. I've never owned a lens as good as this lens. I had the Canon 70-200 f2.8, 70-300. I've had a lot of different telephoto lenses. This one is better than all of those were. This thing is awesome. I love this lens. The Canon 16-35 version 3 f2.8 L is probably the best 16-35 that there is out there. This one is close, but it's not quite as good, and it's still expensive. A couple things that I do miss is that you notice that there's not a focus like the meter on the front, so you can't just like turn it to infinity. And the reason for that is because it's a focus by wire, meaning it's all electronic on the inside. I do miss that for night photography. It used to be that I could just turn my focus meter to right where I know is perfectly sharp at infinity and I'm good to go. Can't do that anymore. I also feel like this 16-35 is a slightly more vulnerable to like lens flare. So when I'm shooting a landscape straight into the sun and I've got that sun star, I'm going to have a little bit more cleanup to do around that sun star with a lens flare than I used to with my Canon. Otherwise, I feel like this one might be a tiny bit sharper, um, but I feel like the Canon is just a really well-rounded performer. This one is a little smaller, a little lighter. I love that. I feel like the build quality on this might be better than the Canon. But really, that's the only thing I've missed so far with Canon, difference in glass. This is the 100 to 400 G Master. And it is just a sweet, sweet lens. How do others get around the Sony metal strap holders? So notice I took them off. Whoops, I just about knocked that off. You see that? I took those little things off. The little strap holders were pretty annoying because they would rattle, and especially in video. So they come off pretty easily. So I just took them off. Let's see. Why the huge telly, not a cheap and better telescope? Interesting. Well, can't shoot sports with a telescope. I guess that would be why. This big guy here is my sport lens, and this is Canon mount, and I've got the Sigma mount on, or the Sigma adapter on here, and it actually focuses pretty well with this adapter on the Sony. Not quite as good as it did with Canon. But what's cool about this is that it is a f2.8 constant aperture, even though it's a 120 to 300 zoom lens. It's the only one that's like that. Normally, if you're going to have a telephoto longer than 200 and a 2.8, it's going to be a prime lens. It's going to be a 400 2.8, 300 2.8, whatever. This is actually a zoom lens, which is really useful if you're shooting sports and people are running at you and like it gets too close. Most people have to switch lenses when they're shooting football. When the action gets close to them, I can just zoom out, and it's kind of nice. Do I own the 100 to 400 Mark II Canon? So I didn't own it, but I used it a whole bunch of times. I rented it a bunch of times. And rather than having that, I had a 150 to 600 for my telephoto. And then for landscape, I had my 70 to 300. The reason I like that 70 to 300 is it was short and compact. It wasn't much longer than this, and it could fit vertically in my camera bag. And I got an extra 100 millimeters over like a 70 to 200 f4. So if the rumored Nikon mirrorless system is only a stone's throw away, would I consider switching again if it stacks up? Probably not, because all of this is like it's a lot of money, but it's also a lot of work to sell all your gear. I hate trying to sell camera gear. I don't have a future in being a salesman. I just hate it. And this has been enough work to where it's going to be a while before Nick switches camera systems. I'm not going to be somebody that just switches, every time something better comes out. I'm going to stick with Sony for several years before I'm tempted to switch to anything. Nikon is definitely the one that I'm more optimistic about. I think Canon's is, like I mentioned in the other chat, I feel like Canon's is probably going to be same sensor as 5D Mark IV, which is meh. It's pretty good. It's not as good as the DA50 or the Sony A7R III, and the video features are probably going to be restricted in some way, whether that's with like a 4K that is a big crop, or a 4K that is in some weird format to where it takes up, you can only record a couple minutes at a time. It's going to have limited video features. And the problem with both Canon and Nikon's new mirrorless systems that are going to come out is that they're going to be first generation. And anytime there's a first generation of something, it's always going to be, there's always going to be bugs. There's going to be problems that you got to fix in the second generation. And Sony is ahead of them in the way that, they've worked out a lot of the bugs and they've figured a lot of stuff out. I'm sure Canon and Nikon will kind of look at what Sony has done and what some of their weak points and try to build on those. Like, I bet both Canon and Nikon have better weather sealing, which is going to be a great bonus. Probably more ergonomic grip and stuff. But it's going to be first generation and there's going to be problems. How do I store and back up photos? That's a loaded question. So I import into my computer. Inside my computer, I have 2 SSD drives, 2 fast solid state drives, and then I also have 2 large spinning drives. Those are 6 terabyte Western Digital black drives. And that's kind of my internal storage. That's the stuff that I'm working on this month. And then externally, I have a NAS system, a network attached storage system. That's from Syntology. I have 5 bays with 8 terabyte drives in them. That's set up in a RAID to where I can have a couple drives die and I still haven't lost photos. And I back everything up to that and I archive everything back into that. And since I'm on a Windows machine, I use a program called SyncToy. And SyncToy is kind of this just really useful thing where I can like pick my folders that I want to back up, choose where I want to back them up to, and hit sync, and it does it overnight. And it works out pretty well. I don't have anything on the cloud, even though I should. Let's see. Disregard if I have already converted. Did I consider the A7 III versus the A7R III before pulling the trigger? So reason I went with the A7R III is because landscape photography is the majority of what I do. And for that reason, I like to print big. Like when I take a photo, when I go out and I'm taking a shot, I'm always envisioning it like this big, beautiful print on somebody's wall. That's always what I like, the end goal for me. And for that reason, like more megapixels is always better. And I know there's a lot of people that are like, oh, we have enough megapixels. Dude, you can never have enough megapixels if you're making really large prints. Because if you make a really large print, you need all the megapixels you need. And with a camera like, those older cameras that, people like old podcasters, old grumpy guys say, well, we have enough megapixels. If you try to make a big print from one of those older cameras, you have to blow them up before you send them off. And all you're doing is losing sharpness. So with a really high megapixel camera, you can make really big prints and they're going to be nice and sharp and detailed. So that was the reason I went with this. More megapixels, basically. A7 III is an excellent camera for anybody shooting portraits or anything like that. If you're a sports shooter, A9 is the better camera. For a landscape photographer, A7R III is the camera. When I go on trips, do I back up my photos? Do I carry a laptop or always use external SSDs? So in the past, like if I go on an important trip, I'm always taking this guy here. This is my laptop. It's not a perfect laptop, but it's a laptop. This is the Dell XPS little 13-inch guy. I take it because it's small and it's portable and it's almost fast enough to do what I want to do. I don't care what kind of laptop you have. It's always frustrating to edit on a laptop because it's just too slow, too small. So in the past, I've always taken that to back up. But I've got what they call a NAR box on the way. And NAR box is this cool little thing. It's no bigger than like a solid state portable drive. You can pop in an SD card and it just backs it up. It sucks all the data off of it, backs it up onto that. And then you can connect to that drive from your phone with like Lightroom Mobile, and you can surf through all your photos. You can star rate them. You can even do base little edits and stuff. So that's going to be my backup method of choice when I'm traveling. Right now I'm using laptops, but I hate editing on a laptop. Do I use a monopod with heavy lenses or mostly tripods? So it depends. When I'm shooting sports, it's always a monopod. So if I'm shooting NFL and I've got this guy with me, that's on a monopod. But if I'm doing wildlife or something, I'm on a tripod because usually I've got more time and I don't have to be quite as mobile. Any tips on night photography with a camera that does not do well in low light? That's tough because that's the main obstacle you have is you need to be able to crank your ISOs. I would say if you have a camera that doesn't do well in low light, rather than starting off with like those detailed shots in the Milky Way, start off with star trails because you don't have to shoot that like in the absolute middle of night, you can start off kind of during late blue hour, and you don't have to crank your ISO up so much. So if you have a cheaper camera, start off with star trails, and that's a nice way of starting off with um, lower ISO shots. Also, light painting will help a lot because you can illuminate your foreground, and you don't have to have quite as high of an ISO for that kind of stuff. How do I use my 2 memory card slots? I actually haven't been using it too much because I shot a wedding with it, and in that case I just wrote to both cards the same files to both cards. Um, but that was actually with the rental that I had, and I haven't been using 2 SD card slots because I'm using doing landscape photography. I very seldom have anything fail, and I pretty much back up every night, or I swap cards every night. I haven't been doing 2 card slots. Let's see. Narbox, did you order the first generation? Yeah, I know that they have second generation coming, but I ordered the first generation. Let's see. Benjamin got to shoot with a 70 to 200 G Master, and yeah. So when I rented my trial period stuff, I did get a 70 to 200 G Master, and that is a beautiful lens. It's a gorgeous lens. For landscape photography, I don't think it's the first choice because it's just as big as the Canon. It's a pretty big lens, and it's almost just as big as this 100 to 400. And then you have that limited reach. Something I haven't really talked about is like moving forward what the next lens is going to be, because if you notice, my main setup when I travel is 100 to 400 and 16 to 35. So I have a gap from 35 millimeters to 100 millimeters. And I've been trying to figure out what I'm going to do for those middle focal ranges. And my plan was just to take this Sony, but this thing is almost as heavy as this thing, if you can believe it. Sony art lenses are heavy, and if I'm not going to be using it very often, like, it's really difficult to talk myself into taking this little beastie thing. So I've been looking at other lenses that kind of fill that gap. And because I don't use those middle focal ranges so often, I feel like I can kind of save a few bucks in that because I'm probably not going to use it terribly often. So I've been looking at the Tamron 28 to 75 f2.8, and it's way lighter than this little guy, even though it's a slightly bigger. It's lighter, and it's the most affordable middle focal range lens for the Sony system out there. And I think it's like 750 or maybe 800 bucks. So I think that's the route I'm going to take for that middle focal range. Yeah. So Dimitri says that Tamron, I think that I'm torn between that and the Sony 24 to 105. That's where I'm torn. But from what I see, the Tamron's actually a little sharper. So got to go with the sharper lens. Let's see. Am I doing any Oregon workshops this year? So yes, I've got how many do I have? I've got 2 Oregon Coast workshops coming up in the fall, and I've already done my Wildflowers and Waterfalls tour. So 2019, I guess, will be the first openings I have for Oregon workshops. I'm going to be doing a wildflower can't talk anymore. Wildflowers and Waterfalls workshop, and that's kind of in the Columbia River Gorge area, but not in the Columbia River Gorge. Some of the bigger Washington State waterfalls. Yeah. Oh, Steve, come on. That's what airplanes are for. Traveling around, like, if you've never been to Oregon, especially if you're an East Coast type person, you've been mostly on that East Coast. Oregon is so diverse. One of the coolest parts of the Pacific Northwest is that you can be shooting a desert and then drive for 1 hour and be shooting in a rainforest, and then drive another 2 hours past that and be shooting on the Oregon coast, which is this beautiful rugged coastline. It's so diverse over here. That's one of the coolest parts of our area. Do I still use graduated ND filters now that so interesting question. I have graduated ND filters, but I seldom use them even when I was shooting Canon. I have more dynamic range, but it hasn't really changed dramatically how I shoot. Maybe I'll bracket a little bit less, but almost always bracketing photos and exposure blending is better than a graduated ND filter. Graduated ND filters are nice if you're not into post processing, but me, I love post processing. That's part of the fun. And I can always do it a little bit more naturally than a graduated filter. Graduated filters, if you think about it, it's almost like a destructive way of shooting. It's like editing in camera, right? And by darkening down that sky, and if you happen to darken down a mountain on the horizon or something before you even get it back to the computer, there's no way to undo that. But if you just bracket your shots, it's like a less destructive way of doing that. You have the full dynamic range in those multiple shots, and then maybe you're not able to post process that in a natural way today, but maybe in 1 year from now you will be able to, and you'll be able to go back and re-edit those shots. If you shoot that with a ND filter or a graduated ND filter, there's no undoing it. It's there forever. So for that reason, I very, very seldom shoot with my graduated filters. The only time I do it is when I have a nice flat horizon line. I can do it in a super natural way. um what is a good printer? I don't know. I do all my printing through print labs, where you just send them the files. And I've been using Bay Photo a lot, Miller's Lab a little bit, but Bay Photo is the main print lab that I go through. Any chances of making a workshop in Europe? So I'm doing a workshop in 3 weeks in Ireland, so that counts, right? And then Iceland, it's kind of Europe, right? Kind of. I'm in talks with. I have several friends in Italy, and they're all trying to talk me into doing some kind of Italian Dolomites workshop, and I'm torn on it because I have a good friend, Erin Bodnick, that does workshops in that area, and I don't want to infringe on her turf in any way. So probably won't be doing a Dolomites workshop, but I might be doing some kind of like Tuscany area workshop. Coolest wildlife encounter. Hmm. I in landscape photography, I haven't really had a ton of wildlife encounters unless spider bites count. Um, I would say and this is from a long time ago. I live in a very like rural agriculture area with tons of wheat fields everywhere. And when you're growing up, like when you're a kid, 16, 17 years old, one of the jobs that the local kids do is called pulling rye, where you basically walk through, acres and acres and acres of wheat fields for, weeks at a time, and pulling out the weeds and laying them down in the rows. And when you do this, you're just out in the middle of nowhere, and you usually have a group of like 4 people, and you're spread out, 300 yards away from each other. And this one time I was doing this, and I'm wading through wheat that's about, almost chest height. And I'm probably 10 feet away from this one particular area. And as I walk up, a cougar, a big male cougar, runs away. And this cougar was laying down in the grass, in the wheat, and I was about to walk and step on it. And I was 10 feet away, and it ran away. And I don't know if you guys are very familiar with cougars, but they are an intimidating animal. Let me tell you, they're basically like, a 300-pound cat that could just eat you. They could kill you, no problem. So what autofocus settings do I use on NFL with 5D Mark IV? So I created, if I remember right, I altered one of my cases, and if you can alter the case, I think you can alter the case. I went with one that was for fast erratic subjects entering and leaving the frame. It's basically with all the settings cranked up, because I use back button focus when I shoot sports. So if something's about to infringe and get in my way, I just stop focusing for a second, and then I start focusing once I have a clear view of them. But I don't remember exactly which case it was, but it was the one that says for fast erratic subjects changing directions and entering your scene, or blah blah blah. Yeah, cougars are okay if you're single. Yeah, exactly. What's my favorite backpack for longer trips? So a long trip for Nick is like 3-hour hike or something like that. And that's a long trip for Nick. I'm not a backpacker. I mean, it's obvious. I'm a big guy. I'm obviously not the hiking type. But I have two camera bags now, the Shimoda 60 liter, the Shimoda 40 liter. I sold off all my f-stop bags because I like the Shimodas better. Um, so longer trips, the longer the trip, a lot of times I prefer a smaller bag because I don't want to pack it. But if it's one of those trips where I need a ton of gear, like non-photography gear, I take the 60 liter because it's got tons and tons of storage. What is the best ND filter brand I would recommend for landscape photography? I'm a big believer in breakthrough photography filters, but you should know and put a little asterisk by this. I am sponsored by them. So I know that some people will be like, well, of course he's going to say that. But that's where I spent my money before I became sponsored by them. Breakthrough photography, what I like about them is they have added traction on the outside of the filter so you can actually grip onto them. They're nice and thin, so you don't get vignetting, and they're color cast neutral, so you're not getting a really strong color cast, and they're cheaper than like Lee filters and stuff. So breakthrough photography, you should check them out. But I only use the X4, which is it's a better glass, and the filter rings are made out of brass rather than like an aluminum. So go with the X4s if you get those. What lens did I take? What lens to take on an Alaskan cruise? Ooh. So it depends on what you're going to see. If you're going on a cruise, I'm assuming you're going to be getting off the ship but you're going to be seeing a lot of stuff from the ship, right? So I would say you want a wide lens and a telephoto lens. So rather than a 70 to 200, I would go with a 100 to 400. That way you've just got a lot more reach. That way, if something's way out there, you see a whale or something, you have a chance of getting a shot at it. Yeah. So the Jason says Shimoda rocks. They need a large ICU. They actually sent me one, so there is a large ICU out there now. Let's see if I got it. This is what the breakthrough photography filters look like. You see the traction on the side. So the large ICU. See if I can do this without dumping stuff out. Urgh. Oh man, I forgot about my coffee. I made coffee and then forgot to drink it. I'm totally gonna spill that in a second. So this is what the large ICU looks like. In here, it's got this. It's basically like a medium ICU, and then you got an extra divider here, and so. Here's my 100 to 400. Can easily go right there, and then you got room for another lens up here. That's the way I've got it situated. Let's see. Yeah, so those just showing up. This is the 16 to 35 f2.8 G Master, and that's my workhorse wide angle lens. I went with 16 to 35 versus the 12 to 24 because I like thread-on filters rather than big blocky square ones. And what just happened? Weird. Just had a pop-up. Rather than big bulky square ones. What is going on? Okay. I'm getting pop-ups and it's annoying me. Anyway. And awesome lens, very sharp. I went with the f2.8 because I like night photography and I didn't want to have a night photography dedicated lens. Let's see. Do I do time-lapse photos and videos? Very seldom. I wish that I want to do more, but the problem with time-lapse is that ironically, it's such a time commitment. Like you have to be there all day. And I don't know if I have the patience for that. Sometimes you have to, I don't know. And you have to be there with multiple setups. Like I want to be shooting landscape photography and moving and tweaking compositions. And that would mean that I would have to have a completely different camera different setup, different tripod, different wide angle lens to do my time lapse as well. Sometimes I'll do it on my little video setup. I'm still using my little Canon M6 for video. So sometimes I'll do some like, low quality time lapse with that. Is the Shimoda 40 carry-on compatible? So the thing that I've noticed, I don't know if anybody's flown in the last like couple weeks. The last time I've flown, they were announcing that they just changed carry-on compatible sizes. So it used to be 24 inches was your carry-on length. Now they changed it to 22. The Shimoda 40 liter is like 22 and a half. And it's so it technically it fits and nobody's ever going to bother you with it. It fits easily, but technically it's not. It's almost, but the aluminum frame inside is like a half inch too long. But it's still smaller than like the f-stop Anja bag, which has always been, it's always carry-on compatible, but technically that's changing. But yes, it is carry-on compatible. So I've got two Wacom tablets. This is my main one. This is the Intuos Medium Pro, and it's actually the older version. I saw they came out with a new version. And then when I'm traveling with my 13-inch laptop right here, I just picked up this little guy. And that is a whole lot more fun to travel with than this thing because it's so much smaller. And this thing is kind of a beast. So when I'm traveling or giving post-processing talks or whatever, I'm using this little guy. And I don't remember what it's called. It connects via Bluetooth. So there's no cables or anything. You have to charge it, but it's a nice companion for a laptop when you're traveling. For landscape photography, do I use a trigger or do I use a delay with a remote? So yes, I sometimes, a lot of times I'll just use a 2-second timer, but if I'm in a situation where I need to time a wave or I'm trying to time things, I like to use a wireless shutter release. I have one from SMDV, and it's like a $50 thing. But what's nice is that it's not a wired one that hangs off the camera. I put a little doohickey, that's the technical term, on my hot shoe, plug it into the USB, and then I've got a range of like 150, 200 feet. So I don't have to be anywhere near my camera. If I see something's happening, I just look over and click. And it's really nice. Yeah, Intuos. Have I had to clean the Sony sensor yet? So yeah, I cleaned my 5D all the time. The Sony, like other people have mentioned, I do notice it collects dust faster than a DSLR, and it's because there's no mirror in there. So pretty much every time I head out to shoot, I use an air blower and I clean off my sensor. I try to be a little extra cautious or a little quicker when I'm switching lenses because it's so vulnerable to getting dust on the sensor. It just is. And that all mirrorless cameras are going to be that way. I would like to see them use a more vigorous cleaning solution. Like when you go to turn it off, I'd like that vibration to be a little bit more violent. So it cleans the sensor a little bit better, but it is a little bit more vulnerable to dust. Doohickey, need more of those on Amazon. Yes. What do I use the Wacom tablet for? So I use it for everything. Like I don't even have a mouse on my desk because if I'm on my desktop or laptop, I use a Wacom tablet. I've gotten so used to post-processing with these because it's so nice when you're in Photoshop and you're dodging and burning, you have so much more fine motor control with your fingertips than you would with a mouse where you're using your whole arm and you can kind of use your fingers, but you just don't have that fine control that you do with a pen, which we spend our whole lives perfecting, how accurate we can be with this motion. It is so nice to be able to post-process that way. And I do lots of dodging and burning and using layers and stuff. And it's so nice in Photoshop to have that. So that's post-processing is the main reason I did it, that I got a tablet. But to learn a tablet quickly, basically, I took my mouse, I unplugged it, put it in a drawer, and I just forced myself to use the Wacom tablet for everything on a computer. And for that reason, I can't even use a mouse anymore. It just feels archaic and like dumb, you know? It's like, eh. Um, for my grip is the second battery Sony. So right now I don't have a battery grip on my Sony. I've just got the Sony with a L bracket. The battery grip is something I'll get before football season, basically. Um, but I went with all Sony brand batteries because I started having really bad experiences with third party batteries in my Canon, and one of the nice parts of the Sony battery is I only own 3. And with my Canon, I owned like 9 because I just flew through them. But with the Sony, it's so easy that, like, when one of the things I haven't really talked about is so nice to be able to just like take my phone charger and plug it into my camera when I'm not using it and just to like top off the battery. I find myself changing batteries in my Sony very, very infrequently because it's hard for me to even go through a battery in a day. And then once I get to like my hotel room or, my campsite for the night, I plug my battery into my phone charger and it's charged by morning. And I never even have to take the batteries out. It's kind of nice. Let's see. Getting back into photography, I bought an 80D. I have the kit lens, Sigma 14 and the Sigma 50. Is there another lens you recommend? So those Sigma lenses, are those the art lenses? Do you have the Sigma 50 millimeter and the Sigma 14 f1.8? If so, those are fantastic lenses. I would say, okay, Anthony says yes. I would say the next lens that you need is some kind of nice telephoto. Um, like if you were to get the Sigma, since you're already doing the Sigma thing, Sigma Contemporary 150 to 600, you would be able to do excellent wildlife photography with that. You'd have, that's going to be like 750 some millimeters of reach. So I would go with a nice telephoto next. Yeah, cool thing is you can use a power bank for charging the battery and like, yeah, the Bigma. I like that. And like, I don't have one with me, but you can just like, if you're doing a time lapse, you can just hang your battery pack from the bag and then plug it into the camera. And then that will power the camera for as long as you could possibly be doing a time lapse. I wish all cameras were able to be charged that way. Let's see. Have I considered using a Rotolight LED lights to light the foreground of the landscape? So I do the way that I love to do it, and I don't know if there's a lot of other people doing this yet. And the more I talk about it, the more likely that is to happen. But what I do is I put lights on my drone, and when I'm doing night photography, and I'll fly my drone up in the air, and then I can illuminate the landscape from the sky. And what's interesting about that is you can fly it way up and you can and do a very subtle amount of light painting, but it's also doing it in a natural light direction. It looks like moonlight because it's coming downward. You can add a little bit of angle to it, so it's kind of raking across the foreground, and it's a much more subtle, natural, believable way of light painting rather than lighting from the ground, which you're never going to get the whole landscape. So you're going to get really bright here and then dark in the background. Drone painting is what I call it. It's a really awesome way of light painting. What is your light painting without a drone? I don't do a lot. If I'm not using a drone, a lot of times I just don't do light painting. A lot of times I'll just expose as much as I can for one shot. Oh, so if I'm doing all natural light, no light painting, I'll take one shot from my sky frame, like ISO 5000 or 4000 or whatever, 20 seconds, get that shot. And then I'll lower my ISO a bit, say ISO, I don't know, 1000. And then I'll do a 2.5 minute long exposure at that same aperture. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me a cleaner foreground, and it's going to give me a foreground with less noise. The sky doesn't matter. So I can use that 2.5 minutes, and that's about as long as you can do it before you start getting hot pixels. And then I'll blend those two frames together. And then if I'm really crazy, because the lack of depth of field, I'll do a focus stack in that technique. That way I've got full depth of field. Don't forget. Thank you. See? Who is that? Goodman733 is looking out for me. He said, don't forget your coffee. It's already kind of cold, but it's not totally cold. Hey, from Miami, have I ever considered shooting in the Everglades? Yes. So I would like to, never have. Somebody that's got a really nice Everglades portfolio or some Everglades portfolio is um, uh, David Thompson. David Thompson has some really cool stuff that makes me want to go there. Although I don't know if I would ever get better stuff than he's got. And why am I not afraid? So Frank asks, aren't you afraid of Sony's bad weather sealing? So I'm nervous about it for sure. And I want to kind of test that out to see just how bad it is. But one of the things that made me less worried about it is the fact that I can take, a 50-cent piece of plastic, put it around my camera, and boom, it's fixed. That's such an easy fix. And I don't shoot in rain like every time I go out. So it's a fix that I wouldn't even have to do that often. Most times I take like a microfiber towel like this. And if I'm shooting in the rain, I just drape it over the top of my camera. That way it's covering the buttons. That's with a camera, then that's just sad. So that was the main reason that I didn't let that particular worry affect my decision as much as I might have. I have a really bad track record with being hard on cameras. Like I just never use any kind of weather sealing, rain covers or anything like that. I might have to start now that I'm a Sony shooter. Any upcoming discount codes? I don't really have any kind of sales planned for it yet. I don't know when the next price drop will come. It'll probably be in the fall, I'm guessing. When I do sales, I want there to be a reason for it rather than, Nick's random sale 2019. Like I want there to be a reason for it. So maybe when the next tutorial comes out, I'll discount the prices of the older ones, or I'll put some kind of bundle together. Do I rate my photos in camera? Nah, not so much, not too much, because I try not to rate. Actually, I don't really rate my landscape photos very often unless I know there's one that, boom, I need to edit that one. Because when I sit down to edit, a lot of times I just go back and I try to find something that I haven't already edited. Now, sometimes I'll go back years in my old photos, and I'll just find something that I'm in the mood to edit. Like I want to be inspired to edit a photo. And a lot of times, a photo that you don't like right after you take it, you might really like a couple of years down the road because our opinions and tastes change. So not so much. Thanksgiving sale. There you go. Um, when am I hopping the pond and coming over to Scotland? So Scotland, I definitely want to go. Um, Probably won't be this year though. Hopefully next year. Next year, I'm going to be doing a workshop in the Faroe Islands, and Scotland is very interesting to me. For one, I love castles, and for two, I'm like I have a large part of Scottish heritage in me. Like I'm pretty much Norwegian, Irish, and Scottish. So I'm like a drunk Viking. But yeah, but I have family members that are of the McCubbins. So I definitely want to go to Scotland. Um, Faroe Islands isn't even launched yet, so keep your eye open for that. So those of you that don't know, if you go over to my website, I have like there's a little pop up that says sign up for newsletter or whatever, and anybody that signs up for that, the only time I ever send anything out to those people that sign up for my email list is when a new workshop or a new tutorial or a new sale is up. So if you guys are interested in tutorials or workshops or just want to be notified of that stuff, go sign up for my thing. And that's at nickpagephotography.com. Let's see. Man, there's some weird people in here. Let's hide this user on this channel. um, do I do calendars? So in the past, I've done calendars. I haven't done one in a couple of years because it's kind of a lot of work. But what I've always wanted to try to find is a way of doing it to where calendars can be shipped right to the customer rather than me buy a whole bunch of calendars and then ship them out to people. Because when you do that, it just feels like you're a professional mailer. You feel like you work at Postal Annex because every time somebody buys one, you got to ship it in the mail and you spend all your time at the post office. Yeah, I know. Trolls, there are so many on here. It's crazy. But they're just one block button away from going away. What's my biggest takeaway from teaching workshops? Interesting. So I've kind of said this a lot of times. I feel like there's two types of photographers. There's the photographers that are very technically oriented. They're into photography by way of the technical part of it. They love the technology. They're really into the camera stuff and all of the doodads and stuff. And those people, when they get to a place, they'll mess with their cameras. Figure out their settings. They set up their tripod. Then they look up and they're like, okay, what are we photographing? Because they're not the creativity part of it is what they struggle with. And then there's the other type of photographer where they're super, super creative. They're really into creative angles and stuff, but the technical ability is just not there. They don't grasp camera settings. They're shooting an aperture priority all the time. They don't like tripods. And there's like these two polar opposite type photographers. And so at workshops, I really try to get people to acknowledge where their weaknesses are so they can work on them. So the person that is really technically savvy, creativity is their weak point. And creativity is kind of a hard thing to learn, hard thing to teach, but it's totally possible. You just have to um, look at the work of others and try to boil down, what is it that you like about that? And then the people that are really creative but not technically savvy, what they need to work on is learning all the technical abilities. So one of the things I always try to get people to do is acknowledge their weak points so they can work on them. Thank you, Rick. I just try to be me. Am I planning to do a critique the community? Yeah, that would actually be kind of cool. I want to do that. I want so one of the things that I do. So the question I'm looking at is Luke. Who was it? Dimitri asked, "Am I planning to do some kind of image critique thing?" I do that for my patrons. If you go to my Patreon account, it's like patreon.com/Nick Page or Nick Page Photography. I forget what it is. Um, yeah, I like do basically critique sessions where I record a video for that person where I go through each of their images and I give critiques and image reviews on it. Um, but it would be interesting to do some kind of thing like that for the YouTube channel, although I don't know. The problem with doing something for a YouTube channel is that there's going to be a lot of people that doesn't apply to, and they're just going to hate it. And if I put out too much of that stuff, everybody just leaves. And I try really hard to only put out stuff that people are actually interested in. This is kind of something that's been on my mind a lot lately is I don't know if you guys feel this, but there's so many YouTubers that just are nothing but sell, 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 sell. And I've got several guys in mind when I'm talking about this, but every email, every video they put out, they're not really giving away information anymore. They're just trying really hard to sell you something. And I know how bad that annoys me. And it's got to annoy other people too. And I never want to be that guy. That's why I'm never going to take on Squarespace. This episode is brought to you by Squarespace. I'm never going to be that guy. My podcast, I'm never going to take on ads or sponsors or anything like that because it just waters it all down to where like you have to eliminate 3/4 of the episode to get to the 1/4 of information that's in it. And hopefully I'm not that way. Like, because I don't ever want to be that way because that's the very thing that annoys me. Um, yeah, I think Steve knows who we're talking about. I don't want to be the guy that calls people out, but you know exactly what it is. And there's several people out there. And there's also people out there that they have great personalities, but and they're good at creating entertaining content, but it's not necessarily content that you learn anything from. You know, they're not amazing photographers that are really teaching you things. But at the same time, there are some people out there, like maybe I should give a couple shout outs. I love Greg Benz is a great example of somebody that just puts out really valuable information for free. And he doesn't charge for it. You know, he's got a panel that he sells you, kind of like Jimmy McIntyre used to do the same thing. Jimmy McIntyre, I loved his channel because it had lots of valuable information in it. Um, you know, there's some people like that are just giving away so much information and so much learning for free that they should be praised for it. But there's also other people out there that just their titles are clickbait, and then you click on them and you were baited because they're just trying to sell you something in the end. Drives me nuts. Any tips or tricks for using back button focus? Takes a lot of practice, but it's worth it. The only time I don't use back button focus is if I'm using a really shallow depth of field. And the reason for that is because there's that split second between when you let off your focus, take your photo usually, unless you hold it down and then do both at the same time. But I love back button focus for landscape photography because you can be set up, you move your focus point, you focus, and then you haven't taken a shot yet. Take your shot, take your photo, and you never have to focus again once you get that initial focus. It's really nice if you're in a situation where maybe the camera isn't focusing well. Once you nail focus once, you don't have to sit there and wait for it to find focus every time. So it's useful in that way, and it's instant. It's not going to like focus then take a photo. It's just going to take a photo the next time you do it. So when I'm doing like seascapes and wave photography, I get my focus, and then everything else after that is just taking a photo. It's not going to try to hunt for focus. Let's see. How's it going? Last question. Do I store images as RAW or DNG? I use the RAW. I don't convert to DNG. It just seems like an extra step, and it's not an extra step that I see the point in doing. I know there are some benefits, but there's not enough for me to take that extra step. Do I think Canon's image stabilization in lens is better than the stabilizer on the Sony? It's hard telling because the in-body stabilization, even if the Sony image stabilization wasn't as good as the Canon's, the in-body stabilization, the IBIS as it's referred to, is so good that it makes up the difference plus some. I haven't really used, I guess I have, but I can't think of the difference. I feel like with my, what lens was it? I was using maybe it was this one, but I was able to do like I'm trying to think of what lens it was, but I was shooting at like 300 millimeters and I was able to get a sharp photo at like a 25th of a second, which is just absurd. Like that is so slow. In-body stabilization is so nice. And it's so nice to have that kind of stabilization on a wide angle lens where I can do like a half to 1 second long exposure at 16 millimeters and get a fairly sharp shot. That's insane. That's not something you could have ever done before. How do I organize my images in Lightroom? So a lot of times I separate everything into so it's all organized by date, but then I have like my travel photography, and then I have weddings, portraits, and sports. So inside of those, then there's dates. And so then it's separated by date. But that's for the photos that are on the inside of my computer rather than archived. A lot of my travel photography, I never archive. I just back it up because I refer back to that to edit all the time. But like sports, weddings, and portraits, I'll take those and I'll move those and archive them onto my NAS system. And I'll just take all of those dates and I'll move them off. That way I'm not clogging up my system. Teleconverter for the G Master. I don't know yet, but I'm interested in it. But it's pretty expensive. That's a really expensive teleconverter, and I'm not so sure that I would use it. Are we turning off IBIS when we're on a tripod? I don't. Um, I'm sure that you can turn it off, but I'm not so sure that you need to on a tripod. I haven't noticed any kind of image softness at all. So I don't think you actually need to turn it off. I've ran out of things to ramble about, guys. Thank you guys for hanging out with me for this little bit. Hopefully, there's been a tidbit in here. I'll post it and leave the comments up and stuff. Thanks. Thanks for watching. And we'll see you guys later. I'm tired. I'm starting to ramble. Take it easy, guys.